Hi everyone, Janelle here. I'm a functional nutritionist and doctor of natural medicine. This is my podcast where we talk about midlife wellness in the mountains. Today I sat down with my incredible friend and colleague, Kate Smith from Colorado, to discuss tools that have worked for us through perimenopause. This was a different approach than I normally take here, and it was a blast. We covered the phases of perimenopause, specific tools that have personally helped us, symptoms that are associated with each phase, and how we feel moving into menopause. Kate and I both agree we need to talk more about these topics and connect with one another around this big transition. This is a longer episode because we just had so much to discuss. Be sure to share this one with a pal that is also on this wild perimenopause adventure. And you could find Kate online at Essentially Healthy with Kate. Hi, everyone, and hi, Kate. I am so thrilled to have you here with me today to talk about perimenopause. So, thank you for joining me.
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay. You and I have been functional nutrition colleagues for, I was trying to figure it out sometime around 5 years or so. We hadn't met until this summer in person. So, that was a blast to meet in person in Colorado, but
Totally.
totally fun. But I love your intensity and your attention to detail. So you're kind of famous for this in our community. And so that is amazing. That is one of your superpowers for sure. But you're also a midlife women's health expert and in midlife yourself. So I love that we're going to kind of take a different approach here and go into things that have personally helped us in our perimenopause adventure, we'll call it.
Yeah,
And
oh, yes.
yes, adventure. So before we get started, generally, perimenopause, natural process, right? Before menopause, and there's different phases. And so I think that's an important part for both of us. So the tool that's going to work for people is dependent on where you are in the process. I mean, some things are, of course, basic, universal, but the key to finding relief, I think, is really knowing where you are in this process and using the appropriate tools. So, to start off, we're going to jump in with where are you in this journey?
Right? Yeah, and, no, I love the discussion of phases because nobody had ever talked through that with me ever, like, I didn't know that, so it's that was a hugely valuable piece of information as a person in the middle of this journey to go, "Oh, now I kind of see where I am," because everybody always says, "Oh, it can last 10 years and you don't know when it started." And you're like,
One to
10 more
10 years.
years? Oh my God. Like, right? Like, yeah. 10 years from when?
Yeah.
Um,
I'm with
yeah.
you. I
So,
think knowing the process is hands down the most empowering thing you can learn because then you just don't feel insane.
oh, absolutely. And knowing that there is a sequence of events
Yes.
to it also makes it so much easier to accept the phase that you're in and kind of rest in the, okay, here's where I'm at. For the most part, this is what comes next. And as opposed to the nebulous, I am stuck like this till who knows when, right? Like I mean, light at the end of the tunnel, essentially. But I think that was also helpful in accepting where I was in the process, as opposed to trying to, go backwards and why can't I fix this, as opposed to just accepting, okay, I'm in, this is where I'm at in this whole transition. So cool, let's support and move on. So where I would call, like, I think there are sort of four phases, like very early perimenopause, and then the transition, which can be early and late, and then late perimenopause. And so I would, based on the fact that I have not had a cycle in nearly 90 days, and that's the second time that's happened to me, I would say I'm late perimenopause.
Okay.
Like,
And
the girls are getting ready to retire, and
they're like, I'm done. Take me
right, I'm
out.
out.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you and I were laughing before we started recording because we are very similar place along this journey. So I call it the waiting zone. So that end part of perimenopause where you have gone several months without menstruating and you're just waiting. Like, is this it? Is this the
Is
12
this
months?
it?
Yes. So in February, I will be in menopause as long as I don't get a cycle again. So I've only menstruated once in the last year. So
Wow.
yeah, I
Right?
am
Yeah.
close.
So,
I
and I'm
am
only like, yeah, if you start from January, I've only twice.
right. So
And
we
they
are
were so
in
close together.
the waiting zone, which I am like, come on, when do I get my award? When do I get my menopause award?
I
Um,
don't I know, like I think I was talking to somebody else about this like a couple weeks ago. You know how there are coming of age parties, like specifically
yes.
in the Jewish tradition, right? There's the bat mitzvah and the bar mitzvah. So I think that we should get a mena mitzvah.
Oh, yes. I
When it's been
totally
365 days, like I'm throwing a party.
Oh, I am having a party, and maybe we can talk about that on another podcast. Like we can come back and talk about menopause when we get there,
Right?
because I'm having a party too, and I already have some details hashed out. But we need to back it up. We need to go into perimenopause first, Kate.
Yes.
um, okay, so we're both in the waiting zone. And before we go into the actual tools that have worked for us along this process, I would love to pause for a second and just double click on the point that you and I both work at this grassroots level. So we are trying to constantly address the root causes of symptoms instead of just trying to mask symptoms. But in perimenopause, it's kind of unique because we are inevitably going to move through these big hormone changes. So there is this place for straight up symptom relief. So it's kind of like a yes and situation in
Absolutely.
perimenopause. Let's start with early perimenopause. That seems like the natural place to start. And
Right?
this is that place at the beginning when typically progesterone starts fluctuating first, right? Because
Oh, yeah, it starts to go down first.
yeah, we stop ovulating every month generally at the beginning. So that's when we get those declines in progesterone. Because if things are off, like other symptoms of estrogen dominance, like you talked about, if we have gut imbalances, digestion, microbiome, if our liver is at all not working optimally, or blood sugar is not optimal, chronic inflammation, it can
Right?
kind of make this phase way worse. And so I think this phase we can do the most with those lifestyle things to improve
Yeah,
how we
for sure.
feel. You agree?
And it can actually, like I have seen people regulate their cycles even just for a little
Yes.
bit longer. Like that's that early perimenopause is where cycles are still regular-ish,
Yep.
right? But you, if you're in tune, like you start to notice that things are different. Like they've adjusted maybe a couple days here or a couple days there, or they're heavier or they're lighter or mid-cycle spot. Like it's where you early menopause or perimenopause is where I think you start to notice those changes. And I agree with you 100%. Like that's where a lot of that foundational work can make the other stages way less painful,
Yeah, I
both
like
literally and figuratively.
yeah, I think that's so important. Like I tell people at this phase, we want to make efforts to ovulate as long as possible. You know,
Mhm.
like menopause is going to come when it comes. It's a lot of genetics there, but you can tweak things at this phase to really improve how your body's functioning to ovulate as long as possible, which is going to help you feel, better longer.
Oh, absolutely. Like I started doing work when I realized really big changes that were in 2018.
Right,
Like
right.
really heavy bleeding. I'm like, whoa, what is that? Right. And so really started to make change. And then things evened out for another,
Me too.
you know, yeah, 2 or 3 years
Okay, so let's
until,
talk about that. What helped you?
yeah.
So you just mentioned something. So this early part, what helped you?
Oh, yeah. So that was a big dietary shift for me that made the biggest difference at that early phase. I was grabbed onto the gluten-free, dairy-free, like very anti-inflammatory. And for a while actually did completely grain-free, just to lessen inflammation, in my whole entire body. So that was the biggest shift for me was more fat um, in my diet and removing things that I figured out, worked through, and paid attention to that were inflammatory for me.
Hmm. I love it.
Yeah.
So then that helped you sort of regulate things a little bit more early on and probably put off some of those symptoms that can get intense a little longer, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and at the same time, I did seek out and look for a really good OBGYN that thought along the same lines. Like I did a lot of research in my area, um, and actually interviewed the one that I ended up with, because she reads all the same books I do. Like she schedules appointments longer when she knows I'm coming because we have so many great conversations around all of this stuff. But I needed that person to be on my team
Hmm.
as well,
Hmm.
because that I needed somebody that could do the procedures and run the labs and help me figure out like what else is going on
Hmm.
at the same time.
Hmm.
And that's where the fibroid diagnosis came into
Hmm.
play. I can't do that myself. Like I can't go, yeah, I have fibroids. Like that doesn't, right. And so starting that process with the dietary changes, but then also having that piece of information helped me make even some additional changes after that to work on the estrogen dominance and the fibroid part of it.
So this is a perfect time to get people on your team. Like we don't want to wait. This is really
Mm,
important, and we're going to get
no.
there in a second. But this is when you start detecting, okay, things are a little off. It's kind of like exciting at this phase a little bit. Maybe that's a weird way to say it. I just get excited. But here's the thing. I get excited because I understand the phases, and I think that's what can happen when people do understand these phases. So it's early on, there's a lot we can do. This is when we can get organized, get those teammates, those team players
Yeah,
on board, like you just said, which is great. So, one of the things that really worked for me at this phase, this was probably one of the most surprising things for me. I started using a CGM at this point, a continuous glucose monitor. I guess I got interested because early on, I started to sleep poorly and I slept well my whole life. And so my early perimenopause, my first thing was I was not sleeping well. And I was trying all sorts of band-aids to help, and nothing was really working. And so then I got that continuous glucose monitor, and I was floored
right.
as an athlete who eats healthy, how dysregulated my blood sugar was. And it was, it's partially genetic for me, and I have to work on it. I have family that has some blood sugar issues. And then I also think it was definitely stress. So we're not going to, we don't need to get into all the things that was.
Like that would be a whole nother
Yeah, yeah,
podcast.
yeah. Totally. But the point is I was shocked. And so that was a tool that really helped me because pretty quickly I got my blood sugar on board. And then I was able to sleep through the night pretty easily. I'll tell you one thing at that phase that did not help me was progesterone cream. I started using progesterone cream at that phase, and I swear it just confused me more and it made things wonky. So
Oh,
I stopped that, and I'll, talk about later. I've come back to it and it's helped. But that early phase, it didn't work for me. It does work for some people. It just confused me at that phase.
yeah, and I think it depends on
Hmm.
where you're at.
Yeah.
And the other in early on in this phase, and now it's something that I do on a at least on a regular basis and will probably continue until I'm post, right? I would consider it a tool, but the Dutch test was phenomenally helpful for me
Mm-hmm. Hmm. I
to
love that.
see, and not necessarily like, I mean, because it is a snapshot in time, right? We know every lab is a snapshot in time, but it helped me to see levels, but it also helped me to see what my body was doing
Hmm.
with the hormones I was producing. And that helped me make some shifts in some areas that changed the way I thought through, I mean, the stress piece, the adrenal piece
Yeah, me too with
for me.
that one. I was shocked at my adrenals. But yeah, what you're saying is nice. Like our hormones are fluctuating a ton, but we can see how we're processing that estrogen. Is it down that inflammatory pathway or not? So I'm
Right.
glad you mentioned the Dutch test. And I think early on, I kind of prefer that one earlier than when things kind of get all crazy, but
Yeah.
it's always helpful.
And
For
if
sure.
I'd have known, like, earlier, like, if
Yeah,
I'd known about
right,
it, it would have
right.
been something that I would have done one in my 20s and then
Yeah.
another one in my 30s, and right? Like, yeah, totally.
And so at this phase, also, just before we move on to the next phase, we kind of discussed earlier, this is a phase we're like trying to ovulate as long as possible. And by supporting our adrenals, it can help by getting enough, vitamin C. There's even been a lot of research behind that with helping support ovulation as long as possible. Blood sugar, that's helpful at this stage. And even like herbs like Vitex at this stage, I think are helpful that can help us
Yeah.
ovulate longer when that's what we're going for. So, anything else before we move on about this? I mean, we could talk a whole podcast on just this phase, but any
Oh,
big
right.
hitters?
The other one that I was interested to learn about back, like 4 or 5 years ago was vitamin E.
Hmm.
Actually, it's very supportive for progesterone production, and so that was something I brought in early on, was a regular daily vitamin E, um, yeah, capsule that helped with that even out. And I know it, like, I had the progesterone cream helped me for a little bit, like early on. That was all I needed, was that small amount. Um, in that phase that you're in, the early phase. Like, I have to
Yeah,
remember we're in the early phase right now.
we're in the
But
early
yeah,
phase. Awesome.
yeah.
Those are great additions. Thank you. Great. Okay. And then of course there's other things, but we're going to move along here to I call it the active perimenopause perimenopause phase. And that when we're talking about that, we're talking about when things have progressed a little bit more. And I think these tumultuous high and lows. So
Oh yeah.
now it's like our estrogen is starting to react and it's starting to say, what is going on here? Things aren't happening the way they used to. And so we sometimes get these big highs in estrogen. And then some months we have these super lows. And so, really, both estrogen and progesterone at this point are wonky. And
Yes.
and to me, from working with hundreds of women here, and then also having gone through it, it's like you're just going, boom, you're just getting swept away at this point. And it's like, what is going on?
Yeah, it is a major roller coaster ride. Like,
Yes.
and you call it the active phase. I call it the transition,
Yes.
right? Like the
Transition works. Yep.
transition, because and your brain is recalibrating, trying
Oh,
to figure, like, essentially it's puberty in reverse,
yes.
really, is what it is. And your brain is trying to recalibrate to figure out, what it's like with less hormone versus, yeah, it's giant roller coaster ride.
Yeah, and you made a good point. Your brain is recalibrating. Okay, so we have estrogen and progesterone receptors all over our body. And so
100%.
recalibrate is one of the terms I consider important to understand during this phase because our immune system recalibrates totally.
Yep.
Our
Yeah.
everything, our brain recalibrates, our gut
Your
recalibrates,
thyroid
our
recalibrates.
thyroid recalibrates, our nervous system
Your
recalibrates,
your adrenal glands
adrenals,
recalibrate. Everything is
everything.
recalibrating right now.
So
Yeah,
it's this
in that.
whole phase of like, what the hell is going on and what is normal because we haven't experienced our new normal yet. So
Right.
it's just wild.
It's, I mean, remember when you were like 12 or 13, it was the same. Your body was trying to figure out it was recalibrating to having this regular set of additional hormones that weren't there before. And now it's like in reverse. Now we have to recalibrate to not having those things. Everything recalibrates.
Everything. And this is again when people just are starting to get desperate is what I
Oh
hear.
yeah.
And the
Yeah.
same is true at the beginning when things like your liver and your gut and your microbiome and your adrenals and all of these things, your thyroid play a really important role with how you experience this, but I feel like you're having less patience in tweaking those things because you're more immediately trying to get rid of these symptoms.
Yeah, because that the transition phase where your periods are irregular, or I mean, they're longer or they're shorter, they're heavier or they're not. there's, depression, anxiety, sleep issues, weight gain, belly fat, like all of the
Hot
everything that can,
flashes, night
hot
sweats,
flashes,
dry
right?
eyes.
Yes.
How about relationship turmoil when you're like, "Why am I in a marriage?" or "Why is this my friend?" I just feel like everything is in turmoil at this age or at this
Yeah,
phase. Yeah.
totally.
Okay,
Yeah.
so okay, do you know how long this lasted for you, this phase?
Um, I mean, if I look, on average in all of the research that I've done, like this phase is about 3 years. Um, on average, what I call the transition phase is about 3 years. And so if I were to think about that, um, I would say I was pretty close to average.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, just kind of based on when things started, they calmed down for a little bit and then kind of ramped up again. Yeah, I would say I was about average. It was about 3 years
Okay. I was a solid 9 months,
of
like,
crazy.
of crazy, where and I'll tell you, like, my biggest symptoms were anxiety. I had never had anxiety in my life, and all of a sudden, I would feel my whole body, and I could even say, I'm not anxious. Like, what is going on?" And
Right?
I had this anxiety. It was so crazy. And my whole body would just react and things would just explode. So anxiety was one of my big ones. This is when I got hot flashes and night sweats. Like so all day. During the night, I would get them just dripping wet. After dinner, I would get them. Like I know it was tied to my blood sugar too, after sometimes that I ate. But
Yeah.
so for me, anxiety, blood, sweats, and then also weight gain. This is when I'm an athlete, I run every day, I'm super fit. All of a sudden, my midsection, I was like, what the hell is going on? My pants wouldn't
Right.
fit. What about you? What
Yep.
were your big symptoms of this phase?
So, I mean, I kind of go like that, and I guess I call that transition longer because really, I kind of started that or kind of hacked the clock on that one when my cycles really started being more irregular, like varying 7 days on one side or the other, like where one month they'd be 37 and the next month they'd be 20, it'd be 23 days, like that kind of, that's where I started paying attention to that piece. So that's a hack the clock for me on the transition. So I might be looking at it a little bit differently for you or than you do. Um, and then so my bigger symptoms were I did have the weight gain and the inflammation, but my bigger symptoms were the heavy bleeds. That
Mhm.
was every single cycle, no matter how long it was, whether it was 37 days or 23 days. I was like having to wear the granny underwear just to because otherwise I'd bleed through whatever I was wearing in short amount of time. Um, so that was the biggest symptom for me at that time, was heavy bleeds, and my periods were lasting sometimes 8 to 10 days long,
Mhm.
which we all know is ridiculous, right? And so then I started getting concerned about anemia and all of the, right, like when your iron's low, all the other things that go along with that. That was my biggest symptom. Kind of midway through that 3 years ish, like first they started getting irregular, then they started getting really heavy. The hot flashes and the night sweats didn't really start for me until probably 6 or 7 months ago. That piece. So for me, it was more, and sleep. and
Mm.
and not like I've never had a problem falling asleep. My problem is always staying asleep. And that for me was when I started really looking into the stress piece
Mm.
of perimenopause and how we are our hormones are so stress reactive, and they get even more stress reactive during this phase. That I was the weight gain piece, I was trying to work out too hard and do all the things that I thought were going to help, right? But that actually were backfiring on me.
I think that so many women do that, including myself too, because everything we've known to work doesn't work the same.
Nope.
And when you feel it, you're just like think you're going totally insane. But
Yeah. You're
but
like, why
again,
is this not working for me when it's worked for me for the last 40 years?
right. And that's why learning
Yeah.
about all this is so helpful. So okay, so what tools worked for you then?
Um, so the like for which thing?
For anything like during so you said
Right.
stress, like that became a really
Yeah.
important thing. So what did you do to address stress specifically
Right.
during
Like,
this
I mean, I
phase?
was, earlier, my normal workout routine was, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I would run. And Tuesday, Thursday, I would do some sort of strength thing. And the more I looked into it, I totally flipped that on its,
Mm,
like, I did a whole backwards, and I don't even run. Like, I've stopped running, and I will walk like long distances and in the mountains and up hills and, on the treadmill when the weather sucks. That happens I'm walking 10,000 steps every day.
mhm,
I will do more on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But I flipped that and am now doing even more strength training 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, for the muscle build, for the metabolism, right? Like the more muscle we have, the more fat we can burn. Um, and from a bone health perspective, like that was part of this. Okay, this is where if don't I don't want to say get this right, but if I don't focus on the right things, I have a history of bone problems in my family. Um, so if I don't work on that, and one of the biggest ways to keep the bone density and bone mass that you have is to do strength training. And so I kind of cranked that one up a notch and watched my body completely change.
mhm, right.
Watched the belly fat go away. I mean, sleeping changed for me because I was not over exerting my already stressed out adrenal glands, because they're the ones that are taking over when the girls shut down. Like, and they're doing the whole recalibration thing. Like, okay, we're about to be in charge of the reproductive hormones. Please don't stress us out in any other way. Right. And I
Yes.
was totally stressing them out.
Yes. We get
Yeah.
so sensitive to cortisol at this phase. And
Yes.
in our modern world where especially as women, we are just go, 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 do it all. I got it, I got it, I got it. And we're revered for being able to do that. It's just not helping
Mm-mm.
at all.
No, no,
I
it was not
agree.
helping. And that's when my sleep changed, was when I stopped running.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe it. I really I have an Aura ring. Do you have an Aura ring? Oh yeah, you do too. So I definitely was learning about how important stress is. And I didn't, it's not even like stress in a way that I would think about it. It was just even like I'd run up,
Right.
I'd wake up and I'd run, and then I'd go sit at my desk all day. And my stress was so high. I was just so shocked. And with my blood sugar, the stress would elevate my blood sugar. I just was mind blown at these things. And
Oh yeah.
you don't need these devices to see it, but like I was just shocked actually seeing the concrete evidence. Um so
Yeah,
yeah,
the blood sugar stress response was one of the things that was like, holy
yeah.
crap. Like,
And we're
you
taught
know,
it, Kate. We're taught it. We were
I
taught
know,
this
I know,
years and years and years ago. I
I
teach it.
know,
And then when you
right?
see it in
Yeah,
yourself, you're like, well, holy hell, wow,
yeah,
that's real.
uh-huh,
So I'm with you. Addressing my stress was probably the biggest thing I did. And I started training differently, which I've talked about in other podcasts. Definitely focused more on strength and protein and building muscle. But one of the tools that really helped me during this phase, which I don't use anymore, was GABA. It's not great for
oh yeah,
everybody, but GABA
right,
for me at this phase, I felt like it was a lifesaver. I could take it in the evening. I could take it if I woke up, and it was pretty immediately helped my nervous system while I was doing the other changes to address my
yeah,
stress and take mini breaks during the day. And I love heart math. I put my hand on my heart just by habit. Um,
right.
it's so quick
And
with helping those adrenals just settle down a little bit.
I tried the GABA and it didn't work for me.
It doesn't work for everybody. It's
Right.
definitely
But I brought
specific.
in adaptogens to do the same thing, and
Yes.
found those worked really well for me. Both rhodiola and ashwagandha
Oh,
helped
nice.
with my yeah, with my stress response. And there was a 3 month stint of time where I was actually brought in with, I did all the research and talked to my OBGYN, especially based on the heavy bleed stuff that was going on. There was a 3 month period of time where I was on bioidentical micronized progesterone, 100
Nice. And
milligrams
how did that
or
help?
micrograms or milligrams. Anyway, the lowest dose kind of thing. And it was amazing. Like
Great.
it really, really helped during that 3 month period of time. And the interesting piece was I would have just, continued on it, but started struggling with constipation,
Hmm. Hmm.
which I was like, that's totally new. Like literally never happens to me kind of thing. I'm like, wonder what that's about. Like diet hadn't changed, nothing else had changed. Um, and started doing a little bit of research and went, oh, okay, I may have too much progesterone on board now that things have calmed a little bit farther down and I've moved towards the later part of that transition, took it out, no problems.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting. Well, it's nice it
Right.
helped
So
for a little bit.
right. And that was, again, that was one of those yes and situations where I think it's important to know that as we're going through this phase, we are not hormone deficient because we're supposed to not have them, right? It's a natural phase that we go through. And when we get on the other end, our hormones are supposed to be low. That's the way that it was all intended to be. There was a time where, for me, that was the yes and situation where I needed progesterone to even things out
Hmm.
so that I was not anemic and lots of other things. But then realized that my body stopped needing it at a certain time because I was feeling a different sort of effect from it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you knew you were in this later phase, you knew progesterone was low, and so it was a great tool for you, which is really
Yeah.
empowering to understand that again, the process. So we're saying at this point, really supporting our adrenals and our stress in various ways is really helpful. I keep thinking, and then we can do a whole podcast on ways to do that. um,
Yeah.
and then also all of the things like at this phase, you want to make sure your thyroid is optimal. So getting that full thyroid panel, you mentioned iron. So, getting that full panel, making sure those nutrients are optimal at this phase. You want everything working really well so that
Yeah. As best
um,
as you can help
as
it to
best as you
work.
can so that as your hormones change, we minimize the symptoms. And then we use those tools like me, GABA, you progesterone, there's all sorts of other ones to help reduce the symptoms that happen with these
Yeah.
big hormone changes. I'm just going to say before we move on, this was the phase where the spiritual component of all of this really hit me. And I did a deep dive into the energetics of these different phases and just really embracing our narrative around transitioning into menopause
Yeah.
and giving myself the time and the space to just pause here and reevaluate. I mean, my relationships, my work, my all of these things, like I felt like I was becoming a new person. I really felt that. Like I was growing
Yeah.
out of my shell
Yeah.
and I'm still in that process, but yeah, that's when it kind of
Well,
started.
and what hit me the most during the same spot was the acceptance piece of it.
Oh, yeah.
A little bit of grieving what was, the regular cycles that weren't a big deal. And I had, normal hormones and all of the things, right? Grieving that and accepting where I was and that this was now the the new thing. Like and accepting the piece of I'm I may be done, right? And but realizing that as opposed to that being a terrible place to be, that it was actually a pretty kick-ass place to be
Heck yeah,
because
I am with you.
you get to the point where you're like, I don't care what you say. Like,
Yes.
this is who I am. I'm going to own who I am. I'm going to accept this is the phase I'm in. I'm going to talk about it with anybody who wants to talk about it because I think it needs to be talked about. And when I cross over into the other side, like, I'm a sage. I am a wise woman who has gone through this whole thing. Let me be that, like, that person, right? In so many cultures, when someone is done with childbearing age, they are just the, like, I just have a Star Wars picture in my head, which always happens, right? When there's just these little old ladies in the village that people go to for everything
Hmm. Hmm.
because they've been there, done that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm totally into rebranding menopause as this amazing opportunity to birth into like the actual person you were meant to be on this earth before you had all these hormones that were telling you to people please and have babies. And so for
Right.
me, I'm the same. I'm just like, "Oh, who is this woman? Who is she?" And I'm getting glimmers of who she is and I'm like, "Oh, hell yeah." Like
Right.
let her out. And but that can be just it's uncomfortable to make changes. It's uncomfortable to transition. And I just had my I had these conversations with my son yesterday as I dropped him off at college. I said to him, we can't up level if there's not some discomfort, if there's not some challenge.
Oh,
And quite
yeah,
honestly, this is the same. And I'm not saying we need to suffer. Like we're all about helping people suffer less,
absolutely.
but there
Right.
is a
Yes.
natural transition zone or thing that happens. So how do
Yeah.
we
The
embrace that?
acceptance piece.
Yes, that's what you said. I love that, the acceptance piece. Okay, well, we got to move on because we just, we can't talk all day, Kate, even though we'd love to. Um, okay,
Come on.
so I know. So we haven't even touched on alcohol, but I have to say before we move on, this is that transition phase, that active phase. That's when I had to reevaluate my relationship with alcohol, but we're going to move on.
I did the same thing. It's like
Mhm.
I have a drink maybe once every 6 months.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm a little bit more than that, but I still had to reevaluate. Okay, so the third phase, that kind of how I broke it up just for our talk today, was I call it the waiting zone. So that time where you start skipping periods and those periods start to be longer and longer, and you might have another period like I did, 6 months after you had, 3 months after. It can look different for everybody, but you're
Yeah.
starting that stopwatch when you're like, okay, I've gone 2 months, I've gone 3 months, I've gone 4 months. Oh, I menstruated again. Then
Right.
you
Now
start
you got to
that,
restart it
then you
again.
have to restart. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about when I say the waiting zone. And so some of the symptoms that some people have during this phase is because estrogen is dropped at this point, like most of the time until those
Yeah.
spikes if you menstruate again. But so frozen shoulder, dry eyes, vaginal dryness, skin changes, weight
Mhm.
changes. What else?
The hot flashes and night sweats can come back in this
Mhm.
phase
With that
too.
low estrogen.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Well, and you
yeah.
talked about you say weight gain
Yes,
too, like
weight
that.
gain really big as our relationship with glucose really changes, insulin sensitivity. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so for me, this has been, like I
And
said
muscle
earlier,
loss.
oh yeah, muscle atrophy, absolutely. Blood sugar, so many things. Microbiome really changes. So you could have digestive symptoms. Um,
Yep.
so again, autoimmune triggers perhaps at this phase. So all sorts of things can happen. So
And the estrogen thyroid relationship was something that I didn't know that much about until started really getting into this. So there are a lot of people that all of a sudden at this phase in the game are like now they're hypothyroid
mhm.
because there's
Mhm.
a relationship between those
Mhm.
two.
So getting
And
that
yeah,
lab work done, staying on top of those labs to make sure is really helpful. Um, so again, I mean, I do teach a whole class on this. We're not going to do that. We're just going to go through a few things that worked for us. So what worked for you or is working for you in this phase since you're sort of new to this phase?
yeah. I mean, I would say I'm yeah newer, but have had the two long stints, right? So I'm still like that's been since December. So
Awesome. So
yeah,
what's working?
eight-ish, eight-ish months. Yeah. One of my biggest cool things that I think, yeah, I mean, it's acupuncture
Mm,
was huge for me during this waiting phase. Just the way they look at the ener the meridians of the body and how they can tell if things are flowing or
Mm,
not flowing. And part of it is a stress piece, but yeah, massage and acupuncture have been a really big helpful thing for me in this phase. Just to and the again, along with that, the herbs that come kind of into that piece on the, some of them adaptogen, but very regulating, as far as sleep and stress. And but yeah, the acupuncture and massage have been a really good tool for me in the last, since February.
that's
So
great. Yeah, those are so helpful. Those are so supportive of all the body
like I feel like I
systems.
have a team, right? My
Yeah,
team of people where
that's
my
great.
OBGYN is watching things and running labs and doing ultrasounds, and then my massage therapist is helping me chill out, and my acupuncturist is helping see how energy is flowing through my body, and I'm working the nutrition piece on my own.
Yeah, yeah, you got that
But
going.
but it's a team of
Yeah,
supportive people that,
absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. So for me during this phase, now the progesterone cream works. So I put that on before bed and it really helps me sleep. I love it.
right
Um,
on.
yeah, it just seems really clear. I use it most nights of the month, so I really love that. I'm also super focused now on collagen and protein and creatine to help grow muscle. So I really love those. I feel really good. I feel like I've dialed that blood sugar now, so like weight isn't a
Yeah,
problem anymore, which is like, oh
right.
wow, okay.
So,
Like these things shift like pretty easily, I think, when you find the right key to what was going on. Um, so I mean, for me, I think I'm pretty close. I do feel that things have calmed down for me
yeah,
personally. Like I said, I've only had one period in the last 13 months. And so I really think I am very close. So I do just feel this like, like I've got my tools, I've got my system dialed. I haven't gone on hormones yet. I'm not opposed to it. I help women, seek that out if they need it, but I haven't needed it yet. I'm just
right.
going with it for now. So I feel that kind of chill phase a little bit, but I think it's taken a while to get there. I was
Yeah.
tumultuous and
I mean,
crazy.
the thing that has reared its head again for me recently is the sleep piece.
Hmm.
The like I have no problem going to sleep, but I will wake up in the middle of the night and be,
So what
and some of
helps
that,
you?
right? So and that's, I'm kind of trying to work on the root cause there. Like I have my amber colored sunglasses that I wear pretty much at from 8 o'clock on.
For your melatonin support.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yes, yes. And you like I did try the micronized progesterone for a couple days, but it just did the same thing constipation wise for me. So I know that's not, but you mentioned the cream, which made me think, I wonder if that would be the right, like maybe that's something that I could try. Because it's a much smaller amount, right? And if maybe that's the thing that would work for me. So that you saying that reminded me that maybe I'll give that a try. Because that's the piece for me that I'm trying to work on. No, like the amber glasses. And I think that just in this phase right now, I'm really, really sensitive to caffeine.
Hmm.
Any amount of it, like I can't, like even a matcha will,
Hmm.
right? And so I've kind of let that go for a small period of time to see if that will help me. So no decaf coffee, no, like not even like a decaf, even the small amount that's in decaf, I think is doing doing a number on me. So yeah, just trying to kind of figure out that piece. That's, I mean, I'm actively working on figuring out the root cause for that one right now.
Yeah, and I think it's so important. Like we take all of the things we learn along the journey, and then those just become easier. And now you can kind of tease apart this next thing. So it's like I love that
It's
about
a
it.
dance.
We
It's totally
build.
a dance.
Yeah, yeah. I really love that. And
And I've
so
said to people numerous times that what may have worked for this thing like a year or two ago may not work for that same thing
yes,
because your body has changed yet
yes.
again. And especially in this crazy cycle, right, of perimenopause, like something will work for a little bit and then it may not work anymore because you've made a shift and you need to figure out what's the better tool for where you're at now.
Yeah, that's so brilliant, Kate. I think that goes back to what you and I were talking about before we even started recording about really how learning the phases is hands down the most empowering part for both of us because
Yeah,
it makes you feel less crazy, but then it also helps you to learn what tool you need and then to revisit tools when you're like just what you said. Okay, I'm in a new phase now. That's why I brought back the progesterone cream. To me, I was like, okay, I'm going to try this again and see what
right.
happens. And then always supporting your microbiome, of course, because as these hormones shift, our microbiome definitely shifts also. So we really want to resupport that at this phase. Always bringing down the inflammation, always addressing, the gut in all of its, hydrochloric acid,
Yeah.
all those different ways if we need it, and staying, like you said, staying on top of your blood work. Um, so we just
Yeah,
have to
that
like,
was something that I had to bring back in or redo again was for remember I said I had done grain free for a little
mm,
while to just reduce overall inflammation and then I could bring back in some gluten-free grains for a while and but then in this later phase
mm,
of transition realized that it was causing me joint pain and
mm.
and and inflammation and as soon as I took out the grains again the inflammation and the joint pain were gone.
Wow.
So that yeah, so again, it's just that like so many things can change and what worked then, might not work here, but might work again. It's just so many different changes and understanding why those changes are happening, right? Like the what's behind the changes and the fluctuations, like you said, knowing where you are in that process is so empowering. And knowing that you can try something and it may or may not work, and that's okay. It's just information. And if it doesn't work, then you try something else.
Right. And maybe someone could feel overwhelmed by all of these changes and like so much to
Oh,
know.
totally.
But really, I mean, we just have to have grace for the process. We just have to do what we can and not put too much pressure on ourselves to do it perfectly. I think connecting with
Absolutely.
each other, sharing our stories, like we don't have to think we have to do every single thing and know our body
Right.
perfectly, but a little bit goes a long way.
Well, and finding a guide,
Mhm.
whether that's somebody like you or me to help come
Mhm.
alongside somebody that's in
Mhm.
you know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
like, yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, well, amen,
having a
girl.
team, right?
Okay, so before we sign off, is there one thing that you would recommend, like one of your favorite tools for all the phases? That way, if someone's like, I don't want to know about anything and it's too overwhelming, like what one thing, I know this is a hard question. What one thing could I do?
One thing. Like what one thing could you do or one thing that you could take or
Yeah, yeah, whatever. Like, what is like
okay.
one thing? Like, I know that's
Right.
hard.
I'm gonna go with my gut. Like, right? So there that's
There
we're
you go.
nutrition
Yeah.
people. Like I'm gonna go with my gut. Um the strength training
Mm,
is I there's so many reasons. Like there yes, I could list off a whole many things, but you're telling me I have to pick one. So I'm gonna pick that one because that was in my brain, that was the first thing that came up because it just shifts so many things at this phase that I think it needs to become a focus. Like that's so really working on building solid muscle mass.
I think that's a great one, Kate. I totally support that. I think that would be huge
And
if
it's a
someone did
lesser
nothing
known
else.
one, right? Like I
Right.
didn't say take the supplement or eat
Right.
this thing. Like seriously, just build muscle.
Build muscle. Yep. Okay, so
Yeah.
mine that I would say, if nothing else, I love that you picked that because that's not the one that I would pick, but I would say that would be absolutely up there is stress. And
Mhm.
so if you did nothing other than work on how you're processing stress and one simple tool if you want to keep it so easy is like bring lemon balm tea into your life. Like,
Right?
honestly, like, if you could just sit and enjoy some lemon balm tea, like, and do nothing else, I think your body would be happy. Yeah, so whatever you can do to address stress, I think those are 2 really big ones, so good job,
Right?
really good.
We go do a workout that builds muscle and then come home and have your cup of tea.
Yes, absolutely. And isn't that funny?
Yeah.
Because that's how we work. We work on the roots. And we didn't even say anything about progesterone and estrogen, and that's what's changing. But we have these big hitters that we can address and impact so much.
Yeah.
So,
So much.
I love you, Kate. I'm so grateful for having you
Love
as a
you too.
colleague and a friend. Oh, hugs. And yeah, so thank you for all the work you do with women, and it's so valuable and important. So thank you for all of that. Thank you for being here. Is there anything you want to add before we sign off?
Oh, just back at you, right? Like yeah.
Thank
I admire what you do and where you are, and would, someday see each other again in person.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, because it's all about connecting.
Yeah.
So thank you, Kate. I appreciate it.
Love you.
You too. Bye bye. That's it for this week. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a comment and a review, as that helps it reach more people. You can find me and the courses I teach, the Midlife Hormone Club and the Energy Club, online at Mountain Rebalance. I help midlife women understand their body and age better. If that sounds like you, please join my newsletter. And if there's a topic you'd like me to cover here or an expert you want me to have on, let me know. In the meantime, keep playing, and here's to aging our best.